So we learned about some important basics now, and our first demo application, this first simple web page, is slowly taking shape. We now learned about URLs and views and how they work together. To conclude this section and come to an end, I want to focus on the response we're sending back, and I also want to add another URL soon. But let's start with the response data to be precise. No matter if it's a not found response or a regular response, what I'm currently sending back is always just a string. It's just some text, some plain text. Challenge text here also holds just some text in the end because it holds the text we store as values in this dictionary. Now, sending back text as a response is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But typically, when you visit a website, what you see is something like this, not just some plain text as we have it here. Now, we see something like this because typically we don't just get back some plain text, but instead HTML content, where HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which is basically code that can be parsed and understood by the browser. And it's then typically combined with CSS for cascading style sheets to add some styling to make this look beautiful and present the content in a visually pleasant way. So typically we send back HTML, very often combined with CSS. And at the moment in this demo application, we're not sending back either of the two. We don't have any styling here, and we don't even have HTML. If we view the page source here of this created page, it's really just plain text, not HTML. And that's not very realistic. If you are building real websites, you want to send back HTML so that the browser can parse this, understand this, also present it correctly to screen readers and so on. And well, you simply want to have a real web page. Therefore, I now want to send back HTML here as well. I still won't add any styling for now. That's something we're going to do in the next course section, but I will start with some HTML. And for that, we could say that we don't want to send back the raw challenge text here, but instead we have the response data variable, and in there I want to have a string that holds some HTML. Let's say at least a h1 tag where we then wrap the selected challenge text. For this, we can use a Python feature which is called string interpolation, or f strings, where we add an f in front of a string, so in front of some text between quotes. And then inside of that string, we can basically inject values into that text so that we have the hard-coded opening and closing h1 tags, but in between we inject a value. And we can simply do that with curly braces here, and then in there refer to challenge text. And now the value selected or stored in the challenge text variable will be injected into this string. And now we can send back the response data here. Now by doing that, if we save this, what happens is that if I reload here, now this looks a bit different because now we get some real HTML code here. If I view the page source, we see the h1 tag here as well. And that is more realistic, that we want to send back HTML like this. Now, of course, I don't just want to send back HTML code here. We also might want to do this in other places. For example, here we could wrap our error message between h1 tags like this. Here I'm not using a formatted string. I'm not using string interpolation because having one single hard-coded HTML string is okay here because the message is always the same. And with that, if we have an invalid value here, this is now also HTML. Now that's good to have, that's nice to have. And with that, we took a step towards a more realistic application, at least a little bit. It's still not the final way on how we will return HTML in bigger applications, but it is a good start. Now, before we move on to the next section, where we will dive into templates and where we will learn how we can render and return more complex HTML documents, before we dive into that, I want to conclude this section by adding one more URL here. Because at the moment, we always have to manually enter the months which we want to visit here. And this is not very convenient and not very realistic. Instead, I would like to have the localhost 8000/challenges URL. And if I visit this, instead of getting this 404 error, it would be nice to get a list of all months where we then can click on the individual months to be taken to the respective URLs automatically. Now, if you feel like it, definitely try building this on your own. In the next lecture, we're going to implement this together.